There are moments in life when you stop and wonder, why does the same pain keep returning, just with a different face? You've tried being stronger, wiser, more cautious. Yet the heartbreak still finds you. The job still drains you. And inside, there's still that quiet emptiness you can't quite name. You ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? Why does this cycle keep repeating? But maybe it's not about what you did wrong. Maybe it runs deeper into something the ancient ones called karma, not as punishment, but as a quiet, invisible loop returning with the same lesson again and again, until you become aware enough to finally see it. And then one day, without fanfare, without warning, something starts to shift. Not outside of you, but within. If you've ever felt that subtle shift, it may mean your karma is already beginning to clear. And what follows are 10 quiet yet profound signs that you're slowly stepping out of the old cycles. 1. You feel complete. Even though nothing around you has changed, there comes a moment, gentle, almost unnoticeable, when you realize you're not craving so much anymore. Not because you have everything, but because somehow you no longer feel like you're missing anything. It's not because you won the lottery. It's not because the world finally gave you what you wanted. It's because something inside you shifted. You're sitting in the second corner of the same room, drinking the same cup of tea, looking at the same morning light, and yet it feels enough. You smile not because something grand just happened, but because peace has quietly entered your space. And that peace didn't come from anything. It came from the realization that nothing was ever missing. Most people spend their lives chasing money, chasing love, chasing recognition, chasing a sense of worth. And when those things don't come, they feel empty, as if life is withholding something they're owed. But the Buddha once taught, it's not having little that makes you poor. It's feeling like you never have enough that causes suffering. There's a kind of blessing. People rarely talk about the blessing of inner sufficiency. A peace that doesn't depend on your job title, your relationship status, or your bank account. When karma is heavy, it makes you believe you need more to be happy, more success, more approval, more security. But after enough trials, enough heartbreaks, something begins to dawn. The more you grasp, the more exhausted you become. And then, one day, you loosen your grip, and in that loosening peace begins to bloom, not from the outside, but right there where you once held on too tight. There's a story of a woman who once sat by her window on an ordinary morning. Her life was far from perfect. She had recently lost her job. Her husband had passed years ago, and her children were busy with lives of their own. Nothing felt easy, but that morning, as the sunlight filtered through the trees, she found herself in tears. Not because she was hurting, but because she was deeply moved by the simple fact that she was still alive, that she could still feel. And in that fragile moment, her heart trembled not from lack, but from a feeling of quiet abundance. Enough for this breath, enough for this light, enough for now. She couldn't quite name what she was feeling, but if you asked a Zen teacher, they might gently smile and call it joy without conditions. As long as you demand life to change before you feel happy, you're placing your peace in someone else's hands. But when you begin to feel whole without needing anything to change, that is a spiritual turning point. You might still live in a small apartment. You might still have a modest job. You might still walk through the world unseen. But suddenly, you feel like you don't need anything more to feel complete. And strangely enough, that's often when life begins to give you more without you chasing it. That's the subtle law of karma. When your inner energy becomes still and content, you stop sending out the vibration of lack, and the universe, in turn, stops echoing it back to you. The Buddha once painted a beautiful image in the Anguttara Nikaya. He said, "A person free from craving is like a clear lake. Even if disturbed, the water settles quickly because its depths are already still. But one who is constantly wanting is like a muddy pond. Even when something good enters, they can't see it because their vision is clouded by restlessness." Have you ever sat in a beautiful place, blue skies, fresh air, yet still felt restless inside? And have you ever sat alone in a quiet room, nothing fancy, nothing new, and felt deeply peaceful? That difference isn't the setting. It's the state of your heart. True fulfillment doesn't come from adding more. It comes from needing less. Spiritual maturity isn't about knowing more sutras, chanting more mantras, or having a title. It's about the capacity to find wholeness in simplicity. To sit with a glass of water, a falling leaf, a square of morning light, and feel grateful. Not because these things are grand, but because your heart has grown wide enough to see each moment as a miracle. That's the blessing of inner enoughness. So if today you feel no urge to prove anything, if you no longer need someone to fill your emptiness, if you can sit still, take a deep breath, and feel at home in your body, then you're already moving in the right direction. If you can enjoy a quiet moment alone and not feel lonely, that's a wealth no bank can measure. And if someone asks you, "But your life looks the same, why are you smiling more?" you can simply say, "Nothing outside has changed, but inside, I have." So don't worry if life hasn't brought you grand changes. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't something added. It's the quiet ability to finally see the beauty in what's already here. That's not giving up. That's the wisdom of a heart that's learned nothing outside can truly fill what's missing inside, and nothing outside can take away what's already full. If you're starting to feel this in your own life, cherish it. And if you're not there yet, don't rush. It's not a goal to achieve. It's a home to return to. A home within yourself that you never truly left. You no longer react. You begin to observe. There was a time, perhaps not so long ago, when just like most people, the moment someone said something unpleasant, your body would respond instantly. Your face would tighten. Your chest would heat up. A rebuttal would rush to your lips like dry grass ready to catch fire. Sometimes you didn't even know what the other person meant. You hadn't taken a full breath, but the reaction had already come. Automatic, unconscious, no pause, no choice, just a reflex, and often followed by regret, anger, harsh words, hurt feelings. They rise and fall like waves crashing into your heart and pulling away, but always leaving a mark. And then you ask yourself, why am I so easily pulled in? What you may not realize is this Riken is the language of karma. When our karma is still heavy, we're easily shaken by the outside world. A comment, a glance, a rejection, a misunderstanding. And just like that emotion flares up and drags us into its storm, we stop being the driver of our mind and become an unwilling passenger of a runaway vehicle. But then, something shifts. Not because life suddenly becomes kinder, not because people change, but because something inside you quietly evolves. You don't react right away anymore. You observe. Imagine this. You're standing by a river. The current is strong, carrying trash, fallen leaves, old memories, maybe even faces from your past. In the past, you might have jumped in to fix the grab, to change something, but now you simply stand and watch. Not because you're numb, but because you understand everything is just passing. There's nothing to hold on to, nothing to fix, only something to be seen. That's wisdom. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha once taught, when contact happens and there is no arising of craving, aversion, or delusion, that is freedom. In other words, contact with the world isn't what hurts us. It's the attachment, the clinging, the reaction that creates suffering. I've met many practitioners who shared before. When someone criticized me, it stung. I felt the urge to explain myself, to defend, to prove them wrong. But now, they no longer need to. Not because they've grown weak, but because they've learned how to stand outside the storm rather than at its center. And you, if you've started to notice a small gap between what happens and how you respond, then you're growing too. When someone says something hurtful, you might still feel the surge of emotion. But instead of reacting, you breathe. You watch. You observe yourself. And you ask, do I really need to say anything right now? Is this even worth my energy? Is this truly about them? Or is it a familiar wound being stirred inside me? This is the difference. The reactive one is a victim of karma. The observer becomes a witness to their own mind. There's an old Zen story. A traveler rushing through the temple grounds accidentally bumped into a monk who was walking slowly and mindfully. The man, irritated, muttered a half-hearted apology, clearly annoyed. But the monk simply said calmly, "You didn't push me. My karma pushed me. I just witnessed it pass. No anger, no defense, just presence. And in that presence lies the deepest freedom." Have you ever stayed silent when everything inside you wanted to shout? Have you ever smiled when someone tried to provoke you? Have you ever felt emotion rising and chose not to follow it? If yes, you're on the right path. You're not living from reaction anymore. You're living from awareness. And when you do that, often enough, something miraculous happens. The world remains the same, but you no longer are. You become steadier, lighter. Not because life is easier, but because you've dropped the heavy burden of reacting to everything. A truly mature person is not someone who always has the perfect comeback, but someone who knows when not to respond at all. Yes, you may be misunderstood. You may lose the argument. They may think you're weak, but only you know. You chose peace over pride, and that is the greatest victory. The Buddha once said, "Conquering yourself is greater than winning 1,000 battles." Every time you choose to observe instead of react, you're conquering your own mind. So, if lately you've noticed you don't snap as easily, you're not moved by praise or criticism, you no longer feel the need to set things straight, then rejoice. That is a beautiful sign. It means karma is loosening its grip, and inner freedom is stepping forward. You're no longer a mirror reflecting the chaos of the world. You're becoming a still lake, clear, quiet, and calm, able to reflect everything without being disturbed. And if someone irritates you today, breathe. Don't fight the emotion. Just watch it rise. Watch it fall. Like clouds in the sky, like waves on the ocean. You don't need to react. Stay with yourself long enough, and you'll realize peace isn't something you have to earn. It's already here. You just have to stop fighting life and start seeing it with the eyes of awareness. 3. You begin to see the sacred in the ordinary. There's a quiet transformation that happens on the spiritual path. It doesn't arrive with fireworks, no applause, no certificate to mark its arrival. But you'll feel it in your own gentle way. It happens when the smallest things suddenly stir something deep inside you. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. A single drop of dew resting on a morning leaf. A beam of sunlight filtering through your window. The accidental touch of someone's hand that feels unexpectedly warm. An ordinary afternoon that feels still, whole. In the past, these things might have passed you by. You were busy living, thinking, chasing things that were bigger, louder, more important. But now, you don't need more to feel enough. And when the ordinary begins to feel profound, that's a sign your mind is quieting, stepping outside the storm of restless thoughts. You might wonder, am I really this moved just by watching a leaf fall? It may sound simple, even silly. But let me share something the Buddha once taught. One day, he silently held up a lotus flower before the assembly. He didn't speak, just turned the flower in his fingers. Everyone was confused, except for the disciple Mahakasyapa, who smiled. In that moment, the Buddha said, "I transmit the true Dharma the wondrous mind of Nirvana to Kasyapa." Why did a single flower carry the ultimate truth? Not because the flower was special, but because the one who truly saw it had shed the layers of grasping and judgment. As long as your mind is busy comparing, desiring, expecting, you won't see the sacred in the everyday. But when the mind begins to rest, everything starts to shine in its own quiet way. Even the shadow falling beside your doorstep has a beauty. The rustle of leaves in the wind becomes a song. Washing dishes can feel like meditation, not because you've discovered something extraordinary, but because you've stopped needing anything to be extraordinary. You begin to see clearly, like a child pausing to watch an ant crawl, or staring at a wildflower as if it were a miracle. But as adults, we lose that wonder. Why? Because we're taught that only big things matter: the vacation, the achievement, the dazzling love story, the new experience. But Buddhism whispers something else. Awakening isn't about chasing the big. It's about showing up fully for the small. a warm cup of tea, a slow breath, a quiet night's sleep. If you're on the path of awakening, there comes a time when you stop chasing highs and start cherishing simplicity. Because simplicity is the doorway to truth, to the Dharma, to your real self. I once heard someone say, I used to need a long trip to feel free. Now, I just step into my backyard, breathe in the morning air, watch the sunrise, and feel whole. Do you understand what that means? It's not that the backyard is more beautiful than the rest of the world. It's that your eyes have changed. The Buddha once said, when the mind is at peace, the world is at peace. Same life, same people, same circumstances, but when your mind is still, you see with gentleness, and suddenly nothing feels ordinary anymore. Have you ever looked at a sunset and felt your heart quietly ache? Not because it was too beautiful, but because your heart was wide open, no longer shielded by thoughts and worries. Someone filled with craving will walk past a golden leaf and feel nothing. But someone who has begun to awaken will pause and hear the whisper of autumn saying something deeply personal. So, if lately you find yourself sitting in silence longer, watching the clouds more, drinking tea slower, listening to the rain without sadness, smiling back at a child's laughter, you're not too sensitive. You're not overly emotional. You're awakening. You're no longer seeing the world through the eyes of analysis, but through the lens of a heart that's beginning to soften. And when that happens, life doesn't need to change to be worth living. You just need to change how you're present within it. If that's happening inside you, don't overlook it. It's a sacred turning point, a sign that karmic layers are gently washing away, that your heart is returning to its pure, original nature. When you can see the sacred in the ordinary, you're no longer living on the surface. You're touching the depth where every moment carries the Dharma's quiet message. Not in some grand temple, not in a holy book, not in something to go searching for, but right here, with an open heart and eyes that are finally ready to see. You no longer crave, yet everything good begins to find you. There's something almost magical that happens on the path of inner transformation. But unless you're still enough, you might miss it. When you stop trying to get everything good begins to come. Not because you've mastered some law of attraction, or because you say the right affirmations, or follow a spiritual ritual that promises miracles, but simply because you've stopped craving from a place of lack. You no longer need everything to go your way in order to feel whole. You no longer cling to outcomes. You no longer measure your worth by success, love, or recognition. And that's when life begins to soften toward you. Have you noticed, when you desperately want something to the point of obsession, it often slips further away? When you want someone to love you so badly, you try too hard and they pull away. When you chase a job until you can't sleep, the interview falls apart. When you sit in meditation, begging for peace, that peace never comes. Why? Because craving, even when disguised as something reasonable, is still a form of grasping. And grasping creates tension. And tension blocks flow. In the Buddha's teaching, this is called tanha, the thirst. Not just ordinary desire, but a hunger to fill the emptiness inside. and nothing outside of you can truly fill that space until you stop thirsting. A meditation student once shared with me. He used to meditate hoping to achieve peace, but the more he tried, the more restless he became. One day, he was so exhausted, he gave up, not from wisdom, just pure burnout. He sat with no expectations. And unexpectedly, the peace he'd been chasing for years quietly arrived. Not because he used the right technique, but because his mind stopped trying to manipulate. When you're no longer trying to control, you stop creating resistance. And when there's no resistance, goodness can flow in, no longer blocked by expectations, no longer clouded by fear. And if lately you've noticed you're not needing much, yet life feels more abundant, then you are beginning to live in a state of deep freedom. You no longer chase money, yet it arrives. You no longer seek love, yet people who respect you appear. You no longer force results, yet you become more effective than ever. It sounds paradoxical, but this is the law of letting go. The Buddha never taught us to give up our dreams. He taught, attachment to dreams is the root of suffering. When you act without clinging, your actions become sacred. When you act from lack, they become a burden. I'm not telling you to stop dreaming or to stop working. I'm simply saying, when you let go of, I must have this, you finally open your hands to receive. Many people fear that letting go of desire will kill their motivation, but actually, you'll work harder, more mindfully, more lovingly, not out of fear, but out of care. Not to control the outcome, but to honor the process. You may still have goals, but your goals no longer own you. You may still have plans, but they no longer steal your peace each morning. A friend might say, I used to see you pray so much. Why don't you ask for anything anymore? And you may smile and answer, because I realized what I prayed for was always here. I just had to stop running to see it. When you no longer crave, you become magnetic, quietly magnetic, not flashy, not desperate, but grounded. And life moves closer because no one is drawn to a demanding soul, but everyone is drawn to a soul that's still and full. You become someone people feel safe around because you're not trying to get anything from them. You become someone opportunities find because you're not pushing to force outcomes on your ego's schedule. You become someone who can wait without treating time as the enemy. And if you're living in that space now, know this is a great blessing. Not a blessing measured by how much you have, but a blessing born from no longer being owned by having. The Buddha said contentment is the greatest wealth. And true contentment is when you're no longer thirsty, no longer hungry, no longer grasping. You live, you give, you are present. And because you no longer crave, everything good finds you, like bees to nectar. So if you're feeling like you don't need anything more yet, life feels deeper, softer, fuller. You're not losing your fire. You're moving closer to the light. If you find yourself no longer praying with desperation, but breathing with quiet gratitude, you're not abandoning your path. You're finally living it. If you no longer use outcomes to define your worth, you're not lost. You're returning to what's real. Honor that space, because it's what so many long for, but can't buy with money, knowledge, or success. You only find it when you stop needing to. 5. You begin to release others from the roles they played in your story. Let me gently ask you something today. Who's taking up the most space in your story? Not in your house, in your mind. Is it the one who hurt you? The one who left without saying goodbye? The one you always wished would understand but never did? Or maybe it's the one you're still trying to prove something to, even though they're no longer part of your life. You might not notice it right away, but we carry those people with us everywhere, not their bodies, but their shadows. Their presence loops in our thoughts like an unfinished scene from an old movie. And so, we keep rewriting the same story, same emotions, different names, different settings, but the same pain, resentment, disappointment, waiting, anger. The Buddha once said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, only by love." This is an eternal truth. But maybe right now, love is too far. Maybe forgiveness feels too much. So what if you started somewhere else? What if you began with release? Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. You might hear your mind say, "I can't forgive them for what they did. I can't forget I need to stay guarded. I can't let go. It means they win." But let me offer you this. While you keep them locked in your heart as the villain, it's you who stays imprisoned. It's your story being built around them. They've become the lead in a narrative that should have always been yours to end. And then one day, you get tired. Tired of retelling that same chapter. Tired of casting them as the antagonist. Tired of letting the past explain every ache in your present. You just want to be free. And that's the moment letting go begins. Letting go doesn't mean you excuse what happened. It doesn't mean you erase the pain. It just means you stop letting their choices shape your future. You stop waiting for them to change, to understand, to apologize. Because deep down, you realize if you wait for that, you may be waiting forever. And while you're waiting, you miss the good people in front of you. You miss the beauty knocking gently at your door. You miss joy because your hands are still holding on to sorrow. Have you ever started something new, but brought old fears with you? Met someone kind, but questioned their love because someone else once betrayed you? Tried a new path, but still carried the weight of an old job that crushed your worth? Entered a relationship, but built walls before it even began? That's when the past is still writing your script. That's when those old characters are still holding the pen. But here's the truth. You don't have to wait for closure from them. You don't need their permission to move on. You just need to rewrite the role they play in your mind. Not the one who hurt me, but the one who came and taught me something. And that one shift can turn the whole heart around. Buddhism calls this transforming karma through wisdom. You don't change the people. You change how you see them. The one who broke you, they became the mirror that showed you your hidden wounds. The one who abandoned you, they taught you how to stay with yourself. The one who betrayed you, they carved the lesson of honesty so deeply into you, you'll never forget it. And then, you no longer need to carry them with anger. You let them go. Not with a loud goodbye, but with a quiet understanding. If you're beginning to release others, know that you're on the path of real healing. No one's forcing you to forgive, but something inside you wants to. Not for them, for you. You're not erasing them from your story. You're simply reducing their role so your story can finally breathe. You begin to write the next chapter with less blame and more clarity. Someone once asked me, "How do I know I've truly let go?" I said, "When you can think of them and your chest no longer tightens. When you can speak about what happened and your eyes don't sting. When you can smile, not because they changed, but because you no longer need them to. You've walked a long road to get here, and maybe you're tired. So maybe now it's time. Not to announce it, not to prove it, just to quietly say in your own heart, I no longer give anyone the lead role in my pain. I choose to end this chapter, not in bitterness, but in peace." And if you do that, you're not just letting them go, you're saving yourself. 6. You are protected by the invisible, as if something gently guides you. Have you ever looked back at your life and quietly wondered, how did I make it through all of that? Even when you thought you were going to fall apart, even when you made poor choices, took the wrong turn, or felt so lost you didn't even know which way you were going. And yet, something held you back, something gentle, silent, but undeniably real. No one saw it. No one showed up at the right time to put a hand on your shoulder. But somehow, you didn't fall as far as you could have. What do you call that? Intuition, luck, coincidence? Or was it the invisible protection of karma that's been slowly cleansed? You see, when your karma is still heavy, life feels like walking against the wind. Every step is hard. Everything feels like resistance. Even the people you meet seem to push against you. But when your karma begins to purify life, doesn't suddenly roll out a red carpet. Instead, it simply becomes lighter. Not because challenges disappear, but because you're no longer being dragged into storms you no longer need. The people who once created chaos in your life quietly fade away. The tasks you once struggled with endlessly somehow get solved even without asking for help. You were about to go somewhere then. For some odd reason, you stayed back only to learn later something happened there, something you were spared from. All those little coincidences, the sudden stops, the change in the wind, they might not look like anything special to someone else. But you know, deep down, you know it wasn't random. The Buddha once taught, when the mind is pure, all the celestial beings will protect you. This doesn't mean you're granted special privileges. It means your energy no longer invites harm. When you no longer hold resentment, you stop creating inner resistance. When you no longer cling or grasp, you stop emitting the signal that calls for struggle. And when you start living with presence, gently, honestly, respectfully, life itself steps back and softly supports your way forward. Maybe you've experienced this before. You were a few minutes late, and because of that, you missed an accident. You were about to say something that could have hurt someone, but for some reason, you held back, and that silence saved a relationship. You didn't know why, but something told you to pause. And only with time did you realize that was protection. It didn't come with flashing lights or angel wings. It came as a quiet change of heart, a shift in the wind, a pause, in your breath, and you chose differently. When you live mindfully, you start to feel there's a current flowing, not pulling you outward, but gently guiding you back to yourself. And that current is intelligent. It knows when to push you forward. It knows when to hold you still. It knows when you're finally ready to lose something, because you're about to discover something far greater. People often ask, what should I do to be protected by the divine? And I say, you don't have to beg for protection. You only have to live in a way that no longer resists the ripening of wise karma. Live truthfully. Live lightly. Live with awareness. And the protection will arrive without needing to be called. Sometimes you find yourself asking, why didn't that bad thing happen to me? Why did I get spared? And maybe there's no clear answer. But if you've ever felt pain and learned and let go of something you deeply wanted, then perhaps you've already stepped into the kind of space where heavy karma can no longer stick. It's still there, but it has nowhere to take root. You are no longer fertile ground for that lesson. And so, you pass through it more gently, not because you avoided it, but because you no longer need to repeat it. You can call it grace. You can call it guidance. Or maybe you don't need to name it at all, but you can feel it. You feel it when you stop at just the right time. When you stop forcing life to go your way. When you finally trust not someone else's plan, but the unfolding of a karmic truth quietly ripening within. The Buddha taught every wholesome action is a seed, and when that seed is ripe, you don't have to ask. The sweet fruit will fall right into your hands. And maybe the greatest form of protection isn't when bad things stop happening, but when they come, and you're no longer swept away by them. They arrive. You see them. You understand. You move through them. That is protection from within. Protection born from wisdom, from clarity, from a mind no longer thrown off course by the world around it. So if lately life feels lighter and you don't know why, if you've somehow avoided trouble even without trying, if you feel like something held you back just before things could have gone wrong, then maybe you're already living within that protection. You don't need to explain it. Just be grateful and keep walking with mindfulness. Because when you live truthfully, gently, and awake, there are invisible forces walking with you, even if you never notice them. 7. When silence becomes a shelter instead of something to fear. Let me ask you something simple, but perhaps deeply revealing. When was the last time you truly sat in silence? I don't mean just being alone. Not turning off all sounds around you, but a moment when you didn't need anything to fill the space. Just you and the silence. Not feeling empty, not feeling sad, just peaceful. If you've ever had even one moment like that, you know it wasn't silence outside of you. It was silence inside of you, and not everyone can bear that. When the weight of karma is still heavy, when the mind is still restless, silence can feel like discomfort, like unease. You sit down, and the mind starts racing. You're alone and the memories come flooding in. You do nothing, and anxiety rushes in to fill the void. So you reach for something to drown it out. Music, a phone call, TV, social media, busy work. Not because you love all those things, but because you're afraid to sit with yourself. Have you ever felt that the Buddha once said one who cannot live with oneself cannot live with others in the right way. That doesn't mean you should isolate yourself from the world. It means if you can't be at peace in your own silence, you'll carry noise with you wherever you go, and then you'll blame the world for your unrest. But the truth is, it's not silence you fear. It's what silence forces you to face. When you sit in a quiet room, you begin to hear the whispers of old wounds, unanswered questions, unforgiven mistakes, buried fears, and it's not easy to sit with those. So instead of facing them, you reach for sound, not for joy, but for escape. You think you fear loneliness, but really you fear meeting yourself in stillness. But then one day, after enough exhaustion, enough seeking, enough asking, you sit down, and instead of running, you stay. You no longer need to fill the space. You no longer need someone to rescue you from this moment. And strangely, silence no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes your refuge. No pressure, no conditions, no demands. Just your presence and the quiet compassion of stillness. Picture someone walking through a forest at dusk. No more voices, just a soft breeze brushing the leaves. The light begins to fade, and they stop, not to take a photo, not to call anyone, but simply to breathe. In that breath, every chase ends. They no longer need to find peace, because peace is already there. In the pause, in the breath, in the silence that's no longer scary. That's when silence is no longer emptiness. It becomes home. Have you ever felt something like that? Maybe once, while washing dishes with no music, no conversation, and you felt at ease. Or waking up early, just watching light slip through the curtains, and it felt like enough. Or driving alone, no podcast, no phone calls, and your chest felt light. If you've had moments like that recently, you've entered a stage where silence is your companion, not your fear. And that is a sign of healing. The Buddha chose to sit beneath the Bodhi tree, not because he had nothing left to do, but because true liberation doesn't come from doing more. It comes from stopping at the right time. It was stillness that led him to the deepest insight. And the same is possible for you. You don't have to go far. You just have to stay long enough in silence until what you feared reveals itself to be nothing more than echoes from the past. And you realize you don't need to fight them anymore. Silence is no longer a cold void. It becomes a garden, a place you begin to tend with your presence, a space where you replant yourself. No rush, no need to bloom fast. Just rooted, still, true. So if lately, you don't need music all the time, you no longer panic when no one's talking, you don't feel alone in your solitude. In fact, you crave a bit of aloneness. You feel recharged simply by sitting still. You choose silence instead of trying to explain. And your heart feels softer for no specific reason. Then you're entering a kind of freedom that runs deep. It doesn't come from anyone. It doesn't need a label. Only you know it. And that peace will never betray you. 8. You're grateful for the pain that once broke you. There's a strange moment that happens somewhere along your journey of growing up. It's when you look back at an old wound, and instead of tensing up, you find yourself gently smiling. Not because you've forgotten what happened, not because you suddenly think it was okay, but because you've come far enough to understand that pain was the beginning of a return. Have you ever felt that way? You look back at someone who once shattered your heart, and there's no bitterness anymore, only understanding. You recall a moment when you fell apart, and instead of shame, you quietly feel thankful. Because that was the turning point, when you finally started living honestly. When we're still trapped in pain, all we can ask is, why did this happen to me? We search for reasons. We blame the other person, blame ourselves, blame fate, blame the world, and maybe all those are true for a while. But then time passes, and you're no longer living in that storm. You've walked through it, and if you've become still enough, clear enough, honest enough, you start asking a different question. What did that pain awaken in me? The Buddha once said, just as the lotus doesn't bloom on dry land, but rises from the mud, wisdom and compassion do not grow from an easy life, they arise from suffering. You can't deeply understand others until you've been betrayed. You can't truly learn to let go until you've lost something precious. You can't stand tall unless you've known what it means to collapse. So pain is not the end. It's the beginning of a new depth. I know there are wounds you'd rather never speak of again. Moments you were abandoned with no explanation. People you trusted who tore you apart. Losses that came too early, too heavy, too cruel. And no one has the right to tell you, be grateful for that before you're ready. But if I may say something softly, when you begin to feel grateful for what once broke you, that's when you're no longer bound by it. You stop telling the story with heaviness. You stop seeing yourself as the victim. You stop using that memory as a shield against the present. You simply see it as something that happened to a version of you that no longer exists. And because of that, you've become someone else now. Someone with depth, with clarity, with a softness you didn't have before. Let me paint you a picture. Someone is climbing a mountain. The path is slick. The wind pushes back. And they fall. They bleed. They hurt. They lose hope. They feel weak. But because they fell, they notice a different trail, sturdier, safer. And because they were forced to sit down from pain, they finally see the breathtaking valley below, a view they completely missed while climbing. Do you see falling isn't always failure? Sometimes life pushes you to the ground so you can finally notice what you've been overlooking. Some pain doesn't come to punish you. It comes to shatter an illusion, to free you from a version of yourself you've clung to for too long. That person who left you, they didn't leave to make you feel unloved forever. They left so you could learn to stay with yourself without needing someone else to anchor your worth. That job that slipped away, it wasn't taken from you to make you feel empty. It was to help you see your value was never on a paycheck. That betrayal, it wasn't meant to harden your heart. It was your invitation to learn true kindness when you chose not to answer pain with hate. If you've been through such things, and now, instead of resentment, you feel your heart soften, That's a quiet but powerful sign of inner growth. You no longer need to win the story. You don't need the other person to admit they were wrong. You don't need anyone to fully understand how much it hurt, because you no longer carry it. You've left it behind, not by forgetting, but by embracing it and walking forward. The Buddha said, "The wise one is the one who makes suffering their teacher." Not everyone learns from pain, but if you do, then that pain becomes your path. Not a scar, but a gateway. Not something to erase, but something to honor. And if today, as you remember something from your past, you don't cry anymore, you don't tighten in your chest, you don't feel like the victim of that memory, but instead, you quietly say, "Thank you." Then you've crossed a threshold that few dare to cross. The threshold of gratitude for the pain that once broke you. Not because you enjoyed the pain, but because you know, without it, you wouldn't have become this deep, this wise, this alive. 9. Old wounds don't repeat anymore. Have you ever wondered why the same kind of pain keeps showing up in your life, just with a different name, a different face? A new person enters your life, but somehow they make you feel like you're reliving an old wound. A new job, but it brings back that same feeling of being disrespected. A fresh opportunity, and yet you end up in disappointment again. It's like life is hitting replay on a song you thought you deleted, only with a new singer. And you're exhausted. You think to yourself, why does this keep happening? Will I ever be free from this pattern? In Buddhist teachings, this is not a coincidence. It's called a karmic pattern, a lesson that hasn't yet been completed. And if you keep feeling the same emotions, even in new situations, it means that karma is still active. Not because you're unlucky, not because life is unfair, but because your inner world is still attracting the familiar, not to punish you, but to invite you to finally see it clearly. I'm not saying you caused all of your pain. I'm only saying this: what hasn't been healed will continue to repeat, and it will keep repeating until you stop and truly look within. Maybe you once loved someone and they left you. Next time, you're more careful. You pick someone different, but somehow it still ends in abandonment. You try harder, you adjust, but it still leads to disappointment. Eventually, you start to believe, maybe I'm just someone who isn't meant to be chosen. But pause for a second. Ask yourself, are you choosing new people with the same old wounded heart? Are you seeking love to fill a hole instead of sharing a full heart? The Buddha said, where there is a cause, there is an effect. When the cause ceases, the effect also ceases. So when those painful patterns stop repeating, it's a sign that something inside you has shifted. You're no longer choosing from old wounds. You're no longer reacting the same way. You're no longer attracting the same kind of energy, not because you're avoiding it, but because you're no longer emitting it. A person who once felt used, if unhealed, will either keep getting used or shut down completely. But when they finally realize their true worth, they stop needing to prove anything. They begin to attract people who don't come to take but to be present. A person who once felt disrespected, if unhealed, will either keep fighting for approval or run from confrontation. But when they no longer tie their identity to what others think, they start resting in quiet self-respect. That's when the old cycle breaks. And it doesn't break because you fought it. It breaks because you're simply not that version of you anymore. You might not even notice it at first. There's no grand announcement, no fireworks. No one comes to say, "Congratulations, you've passed this karmic lesson." But something is different. A new relationship feels safer. A new opportunity comes, and you're no longer afraid to lose it. A familiar trigger shows up, and you don't react the same way. You don't shrink. You don't run. You don't need anyone's validation. And you realize the cycle is over. Once someone insulted you, and you would get angry, defensive, deeply hurt. But now, you just breathe and stay silent. Not because you're weaker, but because you no longer want to play that role in the drama. You don't react. You observe. You see their pain. You don't let it pull you in. You're not avoiding it. You've risen above it. If lately you've been noticing familiar situations, but you're no longer performing the same way. If something that once broke you doesn't even touch you anymore. If you catch yourself saying, "This time I'm not following the old script," then pause and smile. That is a profound sign of healing. You're not trying to avoid repeating the past. You've already stepped out of that loop. The Buddha said, "A wise person doesn't walk twice into a burning wheel." Wisdom is knowing when to stop. You don't have to keep suffering to prove you've learned. Once you see clearly, the lesson is complete, and you don't need to end anyone. You only need to end the version of you that kept replaying the pain over and over, like a silent echo of the past. Today, if you feel even a little different, don't dismiss it. You are quietly walking out of an old chapter, not with noise, not with drama, but with awareness. Just the simple realization, I didn't react like I used to. That is enough. That kind of peace. You can't fake it. That kind of growth. No one can give it to you except yourself. 10. Others begin reflecting your inner peace instead of resisting. You. Have you ever noticed that one day the people who used to exhaust you suddenly feel easier to be around? It's not because they changed, it's because you did. And they're simply reflecting back your new energy, an energy that no longer needs to fight, defend, or prove anything. Maybe before you'd walk into a room and immediately sense tension. You'd say something and someone would go into defensive mode. You'd share your opinion and immediately be met with pushback arguments or misunderstanding. But now, same room, same words, and everything feels calmer. People listen more. They don't argue as quickly. They no longer push you into a corner of conflict. Have you noticed when that shift began? The Buddha once taught, the mind is like a clear mirror. When the dust of defilements is wiped away, all things are reflected as they truly are. It means when your mind becomes still, the world around you begins to mirror that stillness. Not because you control others, but because you no longer emit energy that triggers their defenses. You stop being the battleground where resistance can take root. You end the silent wars within yourself, and the ripples around you begin to soften. You may have once lived in a constant state of guardedness, waiting for someone to disappoint you, ready to defend yourself, always bracing for impact. And as a result, you attracted tension, miscommunication, emotional reactions. But at some point, you got tired. You learned not to need people to be like you. You gave others space to be different. You let yourself be in a room without needing to stand out, be right, or be recognized. And in that letting go of needing to win, you won. You overcame the parts of you that wanted to be right, to be validated. And in that shift, people started showing up differently. They no longer needed to win the conversation. They felt safe to be honest. They felt illuminated, not by your words, but by your presence. A calm presence makes people want to stay close. A person who doesn't impose makes others want to open up. You become a healing energy without even trying. I'm not saying conflict will never arise again. I'm simply inviting you to notice. When healing begins within, even those who used to resist you will start to soften. Not because they suddenly respect you, but because the sharp edges you once carried no longer poke at them. Have you ever walked into a conversation that once would have exploded, but now it flows quietly? Have you ever seen someone who once hurt you, and instead of being triggered, you just felt peace? It's not that they've completely changed. It's that you no longer send out the invitation to battle. When you live with a light heart, people feel lighter around you. When you stop judging, they stop needing to defend. When you no longer need to be understood, people start wanting to understand you. When you stop demanding kindness, you start inviting kindness. Not with words, not with effort, but with presence. There's a beautiful line in Buddhist scripture: when a true practitioner passes by, even the trees and grasses bow in silence. That means one's energy can shift the atmosphere, not through action, but through being. If lately you've noticed people being gentler with you, more open, more willing to listen, perhaps it's a reflection of the peace growing inside you. You don't need to inspire anyone. You just need to become the space where others feel safe to be themselves. And if you've recently found that, people speak to you more gently. Conflicts seem to arise less. You don't have to force harmony, it just happens. Then you are entering a beautiful season where your inner peace becomes a mirror. People stop reacting and start reflecting. Not because you've mastered them, but because you've stopped broadcasting your inner unrest. This transformation doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation. But you know it's real because you no longer feel drained around people. You no longer fear speaking your truth. You no longer attract unnecessary arguments. And if someone brings a storm, you no longer let it become a storm inside you. You don't shut them down. You simply don't resonate with the chaos. And the storm dissolves because there's nothing left for it to feed on. Dear friend, if this path has helped you touch even a glimpse of deep inner calm, know this wasn't random. Sometimes, all it takes is one line, one quiet moment, one pause to begin seeing your way forward again. And if your heart feels even a little lighter, that's already a transformation. Let's keep walking this path of awakening together. Subscribe to Buddhism Seeds to receive more healing insights and timeless Buddhist wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your journey. Like this video if something in it touched your soul, and share it with someone who may need a little light today. Peace doesn't come from outside. It begins with you. And you are never alone on this path.